I'm a 21-year-old girl who loves to watch horror stories on YouTube. I'm not gonna lie though, 9 times out of 10, when I watch these stories, I assume they're fake. I've never heard of a single person I know go through anything like what I've heard about on here. I see things on the news, sure, but nothing's ever hit close to home. However, that was only the case until something truly shocking happened to me last week. It happened in a completely safe neighborhood too, forcing me to realize this stuff actually does happen in real life, no matter who or where you are. When this happened, only my dad and I were home, as my mom had gone overseas for a couple of weeks. He had gone to bed around 10 p.m., but I'm a college student who's off school for the summer, so I was taking the opportunity to stay up as late as I wanted. I had the living room to myself, with access to all the streaming services my parents were signed up to. I was so sucked into it all that I didn't even think to close the curtains. The whole neighborhood had gone to bed except for me, and aside from the street lights, it felt like the TV was the only light shining on the whole block. It was just about the only thing making any noise too. The silence around me lasted for hours, until around 1 a.m., when I heard a sound as if the garage door was opening. However, this happened a lot where I'd hear a noise late at night that sounded like the garage, when it was really just the AC unit kicking on. So for a second I thought nothing of it. I just waited to feel a current of fresh air. Though, as I listened more closely to the noise and noticed how soon it had stopped, I realized it sounded exactly like the garage door did when it opened. I still believed I was being paranoid, but I decided to get up and check anyway. I walked up to the door that led out to the garage and opened it to double check that the garage door was still closed. I experienced the worst fear, shock, and horror of my life when I saw a man standing inside my garage. We made the most terrifying, gut-wrenching eye contact before I freaked out and slammed the door back into the house. I locked it a split second before I heard the man on the other side run into it. At this point, I froze for a second involuntarily. It was like my brain knew I should run to my dad for help, but my heart was beating so fast, and my legs were so shaky I could barely move. I snapped out of the state when the doorknob in front of me started to shake. The guy was trying to get in. I ran as fast as I could upstairs to my dad's room and told him someone was breaking in. He shot up out of bed and ran in front of me to where I was already headed, the closet where we kept our revolver. He grabbed the gun and rushed downstairs to the garage door, where someone was still trying to get through. I stupidly did not think to call the police until that moment, so I whipped out my phone to call 911 as my dad ordered me to go upstairs and lock myself in my room. I did so, crying as I went because I was so scared something would happen to my dad. It felt like forever. I kept expecting to hear screaming, gunshots, then the sound of someone creeping up the stairs to get me. I can't even remember how long I waited for. It could have been minutes or hours, but the police finally showed up. I heard the sirens come down the road and saw the red and blue lights flashing outside. But even then, I still had to wait for them to catch him and hope that nobody got hurt. Thankfully, the police were able to catch the man in our garage without any major disaster. He was never able to get inside the house, but continued to bang on the door and mess with the knob until the last second. I came downstairs upon hearing my dad give me the all clear. I got to see the man being walked away in handcuffs. He tried to hide his face, but my dad was still able to identify him. Apparently, the guy trying to break in was one of our neighbors. He knew my mom would be out of town, and he knew her garage code, because my parents gave it to some of our neighbors in case we needed anything in the event of some emergency while we were away. With all the chaos that night, I didn't immediately recognize him myself. I just took my dad's word that he lived nearby, but then a few hours later, it clicked. I did know that guy, but we had never actually spoken. I only recognized him because for years, I've walked past his house and seen him staring at me out of the corner of my eye, sometimes from his front yard, sometimes through his windows. I always assumed he was just a starey divorced dad. Never expected he was ever thinking about something as crazy as breaking into our house. Now, I have to wonder how long he could have been watching me without me knowing. The craziest thing is, I couldn't even put a name to his face for the longest time, even when he was standing in the garage right in front of my eyes. Letting him have the garage code is my parents' biggest regret to this day. They've just never had a reason not to trust anyone in their lives and didn't see it as a big deal. The police haven't yet updated us on my neighbor's motive, though I guess it's not really a mystery. After this happened, because I keep picturing this guy's sick, deranged face every time I close my eyes. It was a hot summer night. I knew I wasn't going to get any sleep due to the heat, so I asked a close friend at the time if she wanted to meet up at the beach in the evening. She said yes, and told me she would bring her camera to take photos for her Instagram. I arrived at the meetup point before her, so I looked around and observed the area. Not much stood out, except I noticed two older guys glancing at me every now and then from across the street. I looked back at them a few times to make sure they were aware of them, but in the time I was waiting there, nothing else happened. Soon my friend arrived and I forgot about them. We were about a 30-minute walk from the beach, as we had planned to stop at some of the shops in the artsy little beach town. When we eventually got to the beach, we got some great shots of the sea and each other before the sun started to set, and we got some stellar shots of that too. Then we started asking people if we could take photos of them, and plenty of amazing people agreed. University students doing group yoga on the beach, an elderly couple dancing to music, a mother playing with her baby. It was going perfectly, and the lighting was incredible. After a while, the sun had gone away, and we had taken plenty of pictures for my friend's Instagram. We took an empty back street, as it was the fastest route to get to a cafe I wanted to show her. The back streets were usually safe, but I guess I wasn't used to walking around there at night. At some point, out of the corner of my eye, I saw two men quickly crossing the street. They got in front of us and stopped us, and it was at this moment I realized they were the same men I saw looking at me earlier. My heart jumped. One guy was slightly buff, but the other was quite skinny, both in their mid-30s. Once they were fully blocking our way, they asked us to take photos of them. Alarms started blaring in my head. We were at least 10 minutes from the beach, so they shouldn't have seen us taking photos of other people there. What would make them rush across the street and ask us to do something like that with no context? I felt like screaming no, but my friend, who had never seen these guys before, agreed. It was annoyingly common for her to be like that, super kind and people-pleasing. I just smiled and nodded at the guys. They were eerily emotionless. They kept a deadpan face as they spoke, betraying the fake niceness in their voices. While my friend was taking photos of them doing various poses, I watched awkwardly. They kept looking over at me instead of the camera, never showing a single hint of emotion no matter what position they were in. It was like they were living mannequins. When the mini photo shoot was done, the skinny guy placed his hat on my friend's head. She laughed and thanked him, but it made my stomach churn as I now knew this was going to go further than just photos. Just as I suspected, the men suggested we get drinks together, still not smiling in the slightest. I elbowed my friend to tell her we should get out of this, but she ignored me. Instead, she actually cheered and said she was really thirsty, giving these robotic men her most enthusiastic excitement. It was so insane that I felt dizzy, even though I had told her the cafe we were headed to was open. The men lied and claimed that it was too late, so only bars would be open. This was when I finally butted in and said we were too young to drink, which was true. The buff guy just laughed and said it didn't matter because he would buy drinks for us, but I couldn't even think of a response to that. I just stood there with a look of shock and dread on my face. And that fear, that show of helplessness, was what finally made their facade start to crack. A smirk spread across the thinner man's face, sending shivers down my spine. I grabbed my friend by the wrist and started begging her to leave, whispering that this all just felt wrong. My friend and I had a sidebar conversation at that moment, and while she was stupidly saying it would be fine, the two men kept trying to convince us to go. They even started to move closer to us, and then one of them gripped my shoulder, silencing me mid-sentence. I turned my head in horror and saw the most gut-wrenching sight of my life. The buff man had grabbed a hold of me, and in his other hand, hidden at his waist, was a knife. My instincts took over. I still had my friend by the wrist, so I just bolted. I felt the man's grip on my shoulder tighten, almost hard enough to hold me back, but I barely managed to slip away I hadn't screamed or anything. I just grabbed my friend and ran. Then I didn't stop until I dragged her into a more populated area. I think if I had wasted the breath, we wouldn't have gotten away. But this left my airheaded friend confused and pissed at me. She just couldn't get it through her head that those guys were bad news. Even as we were getting into a cab, so we didn't have to leave on foot, I pointed the men out to her. They were still watching us from across the street, just like they were from the start, and probably had been all evening. I could still see the glint of metal in the larger man's hand, but my friend refused to believe he was holding a weapon, claiming it was probably just his phone. This story was what made me stop talking to that friend. She thought I was over-exaggerating and said I was being annoying by mentioning it so much. I might have saved her life, and she can't even say thanks. To think she's out there, navigating the world on her own. It's a wonder how she's still alive. In early 2020, I was stuck at home under quarantine like everyone else. I lived alone, so I was lonely and bored for most of it. One day, the loneliness finally got the better of me, and I decided to try a dating app for the first time. I made my account over breakfast, uploading 10 or so of the best pictures I had of me at the time. Afterwards, I went to the living room and sat on the couch and started swiping through the app. It seemed like a lot of people had the same idea as me, so there was a ton of activity, and it didn't take long to match with several guys. I noticed one of the messages I got from a blank profile saying, "Sup, it says you're close. Want to come over?" I clicked on his profile. He had no pictures, no age or status. So I replied asking if he had any pictures. He sent back 2 images. He was an old white guy in his 40s or 50s, with a long beard. He was very hairy and creepy looking, almost old enough to be my dad. I had no experience with dating apps, but I want to always be respectful and clear if I'm not interested in someone. I responded to his images with a text letting him know I was sorry, but he wasn't my type, so I wasn't interested. Honestly, I thought he would just block me, but he replied with a message that left me speechless. He sent me a screenshot of my house on Google Earth and typed my exact address. Then he blocked me seconds after I saw it. It was really frightening, but I told myself I was just being paranoid and laughed it off. Then I took a shower to reset. About 20 minutes later, I came out of the shower and saw I had 10 missed calls from an unknown number, along with 1 voicemail. I figured I was being prank called by my friends, as it was something they would do. I played the voicemail, but I only heard random muffled sounds for a few seconds. I brushed it off, then I went to lay in bed. As I opened the dating app again, there was a message from another blank profile that said, "Look outside." Before I could even click on the profile, they blocked me, and the message disappeared again. I panicked and shot out of bed to peek through my blinds at my bay window, but there was nobody out there. I kept staring, expecting to see someone. Then I realized my phone was ringing again. It was the same unknown caller spam calling me. I got agitated and picked up, but nobody responded to me on the other side. All I heard was someone breathing slow and heavy. Then after about 10 seconds, they hung up. I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and put it down to watch some TV in bed. A while later, I grabbed my phone out of curiosity. I thought there was no way they would try to call again, but as it turned out, I had 20 more missed calls from them, and they were still going. It was about 2 in the morning, so this was getting to be really annoying. When they called again, I answered just so I could cuss them out and tell them to stop calling me. This time, I could hear something from the other end of the call, and it made every hair on my body stand on end. It sounded exactly what was playing on my TV right in front of me, only delayed by a few seconds. I froze, horrified that the caller might be hiding in my room. Then, for the first time, I heard a voice on the other end. It said, "Look outside again." At this point, I thought I was losing my mind. When I gathered the courage, with my blanket wrapped around me, I crept up to my closet and flung the door open. There was nobody in it. Next, I checked under my bed. Nobody there either. Finally, I went over to my window facing the backyard I cracked the blinds and looked outside, and there was a man standing on the patio. He was holding a phone and staring directly up at me. Fear took over my body. I screamed and ran into my bathroom, locking the door and jamming a rug underneath it. I called the police, begging for help. I told them what was happening, and in an act so disrespectful it made me lose my faith in humanity. They didn't show up for 2 hours. It felt like days. When they finally came, the guy was no longer there. The cops said there was nothing they could do. They basically blamed me for the whole thing, too, saying I brought it on myself by being on a dating app, as if I signed up to have strangers find out everything about me when I downloaded it. Irritated beyond belief, I sent them out since they were no help at all. I was a paranoid wreck for weeks after that, always expecting to see that freak again, never being able to believe that it was over. I still think about that man whenever someone mentions dating apps. I certainly never intend to use one ever again.